to be honest with you, when I first got the data, I thought that I would maybe be doing some kind of explanatory, feature-y kind of stories. I'd been doing a lot of heavy investigations, and I kind of saw writing about marathons for a few weeks as a break, a little bit of a holiday. I was not looking for an investigative story first and foremost in my head. That I happened to find one was really interesting, but I didn't start looking for it. So I didn't really have a clear list of ideas. I had some suspicions about what I might find in the data. So if you were to go back and check the clips, the very first story that I did using the data was more of a sports feature story. It was a story that looked at people who got really close to finishing the New York City Marathon but didn't finish. And I used the data to figure out which people I was going to call. So if you were to read the lead of that story, it starts with a gentleman who literally was in Central Park after running more than 26 miles. He was in Central Park and he could see the finish line and he collapsed. And it was describing his own personal pain and anguish. And then I found other people like that. So it was really a series of, of anecdotes, but the data then helped tell the bigger picture of the number of people who start the marathon but fail to finish. A story that maybe I could have done without data. Maybe I could have tweeted people and gotten anecdotes that way. Hey, did you ever run the marathon and not finish? But the data let me find, the person who came closest to finishing but didn't finish. The data let me find people who bailed out at different junctures in the race. So the data, I think, let me do a story I might have been able to do otherwise, but it let me do the story bigger and more accurately. And it was in the course of doing that story that took, a day or two of phone calls and talking with people to turn around. It was in the course of doing that that I realized, wait a minute, going through the data, there are people here who appear to be cheating. These are, and that's kind of how I got onto the cheating story. There's a few things that I do with any data set when I get it. First is I want to test the data set. I think of data as a lot like a source. When you go and interview a source on a story, sources can be great, they can be charming, they can be intelligent, but almost any source that you'll interview will also have blind spots in what they know. They know certain things through firsthand knowledge and other things they don't quite know anything about. Maybe they'll guess at it through secondhand knowledge, or maybe they just say, I don't know. With data, it's the same thing. Data sets may know certain things really well and other things not so well. So how do you test a data set? Well, one of the first things you do is you look at all the columns of information and you say, okay, how complete are these columns? Do we have the names of everybody here filled out? Do they seem to be filled out cleanly? Okay, great. What about simple things like identifying numbers with every person? So in the case of the marathon data, every runner gets a little bib number, the number that you'll see on their chest, as that serves as their ID number. Okay, what else do we know about these people? Well, the data seems to tell us when they started the marathon and how they progressed through the marathon. Is that always filled out? And so in the case of the marathon data, it was actually pretty simple. It was, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 columns or 12 columns worth of data. There weren't many columns to analyze, and you could see what was filled out and what wasn't filled out. But then the other thing you want to do, and by the way, in data terms, that's the kinds of checking I just described to you fall under the category of what they call internal validity. How do things check out when you just look at the data set? Then there's also this concept called external validity. Okay, you look at the data, it seems to list all the marathoners, but does it really? Let's check it with other sources. So in this case, as something as simple as the marathon data, you're checking newspaper clips, you're calling up the organizing entity. You say, look, I look at the data set and it seems to list 45,628 runners. Is this how many people entered the race? Is this how many people started the race? Is this how many people finished the race? Did you give me this data set and somehow exclude people so that I'm looking at a data set that's incomplete and only you know that those records are missing? So we do those kinds of checks as well. As I was going through the data set, I realized at first that there were some records that they did not give to me. And I remember calling back in this case, the Roadrunners Association, the New York Roadrunners, and saying, you know, do I have all the records? And they said, well, actually not. We gave you this because this showed all the people who finished the race, because the data was designed in part for their website and for newspapers to publish finishers. So it was designed in part as a production application, as well as for runners to check themselves to see how well they did during the race, as well as how they finished. But some people were not in there, so I spoke with them and said, well, I really am not interested in just most of the people. I want all the people. That was a very simple version of a negotiation that happens a lot with data, where someone says, well, I gave you the data set, and you say, well, yeah, but it doesn't have everything that I want. And of course, we like to get a hold of everything. First off, you know, be honest with them. You don't want to, you know, to mislead or deceive them. I was letting them know that I was interested in doing a series of stories looking at the marathon, and that I thought the data would be helpful in examining that. You know, I'd be going through the data, and again, I'm kind of curious. I'm playing through it. I'm looking through it, and in the case of marathons, you know, it's, for those who don't know, it's a long race. It could take people, you know, a little bit more than 2 hours, or it could take them 7 hours to finish. So I'm looking through the data, and one of the things about the data is it told us at various kilometers how well they were doing. 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers. I can't recall the exact gradations, but you could see people progressing through the race. So I started playing around with things like, okay, well, the data has information about how fast or slow people were going. Again, you're the same way when you're interviewing a source, you would say, oh, this source knows about, you know, what the world looks like this way or that way. In this case, the data knows a lot about how fast or slow people were going. And I'm thinking, well, how fast or slow, you know, did someone go really fast and then started going really slow, or did someone go really slow and then went really fast? And I'm asking these questions in part because the source, the data, happens to know a lot about how fast people went even before they finished the race. And as I was going through that, I saw missing values. And missing values are like one of those things we're always checking in databases. I know one friend of mine and I, one day we were going through data sets. To give you another example, we're going through data sets looking at murders in the United States. And as we're going through the data set, the column of data included a field that told us whether somebody died because they were shot by police. And when we analyzed the data, we saw that the data had no records whatsoever of anyone ever being shot and dying from a police gun. And of course, we knew that not to be true. So when you see something like that, you ask a question. In the case of the homicide data, that led us to call the FBI and say, there appears to be records missing. We want more records. In the case of the marathon data, I'm saying these people are missing time, and I start calling around and I realize, well, it's going to be probably one of two things. One, the people as they cross the various mats along the race course, their chip, their computer chip in their shoes just didn't register with the mat. A computer error. But what if it's not a computer error? What if it's something else? And so talking with one of the technology people at the Roadrunners, what I realized is that they believe that if someone misses, I believe it's 5 mats, if you miss 5 mats in a row, they're suspicious about you. Now, most of the people who don't finish who don't hit 5 mats in a row are people who also don't finish the race. They've run halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, they drop out, and so you see no times for them throughout the rest of the race, and you do not see a finish time. But then I realized that there were a bunch of people, dozens of people, who also had, who were missing 5 mats or more, and also had a finish time. And I was wondering how that could be. But before asking more questions of people, I wanted to try to verify the data and see what might be going on. And there was another data set that I used as well. And it's a data set that you might not have thought of using for a story like this. And the data was this. If you run in a marathon, people who run marathons apparently like to have pictures taken of themselves. And for you to then buy your souvenir picture, there's a website that's created. So that if you take your bib number and you put it into the website, you can see your photograph at various points in the race, as photographers would take your picture, and you could then have your souvenir photograph. So the road runners, the race organizers for the marathon, have all these photographers stationed throughout the entire race course. So you would think that even if someone's computer chip failed to hit a mat, that there would also be all these photographers who are also taking thousands of pictures, looking at your bib numbers. They're not using computers. They're using images of your bib, your face as you sweat and run through New York City, one of the biggest marathons in the world. And then I would realize that these very runners who had large gaps of time in the marathon also were missing photographs. So I'm getting like essentially another source that's saying to me, guess what? These people are somehow vanishing off the course. They're not appearing in photographs, they're not appearing in the data, and yet they magically appear at the finish line. How could that be? That you could do by hand, and of course you could automate it and scrape it, but the thing is, each photograph I wanted to inspect myself. So while I could have automated the process, because I had to be looking at the photographs, you know, one by one anyway, I just looked at them one by one. This became very important, by the way, because by doing that you would see other things that didn't make sense, and became a key part of the story. And that was essentially the third data set that we created and analyzed, which is I took the data that the New York City Roadrunners had posted saying who won each portion of the race. So when you win the New York City Marathon, you could win for being the best male runner, the best female runner. But there are also these smaller categories. You could be the best male runner who's 20 years or younger. You could be the best female runner who's, I think, 60 or 65 years or older. There are these age categories. There are these local categories. And so I started running through the data, and I realized the data told me that certain people should have won their age division. And then when I ran the data of the latest official winners, I realized that the people and bib numbers did not match up. So then you could look at photographs and you would find these cases of the 60-year-old Italian runner who in the database should have won his age group. But then you look at his photograph and the photo you see is of essentially a 25-year-old Italian movie star looking gentleman, clearly not 60 years old. So that's when I realized that the cheating was so problematic that people were actually cheating and winning age divisions and other medals they shouldn't have won.